Okay, today we're going to talk about some of the key battles in the Civil War. We're in no way going to talk about all of them in this lecture. We don't have enough time for that in this one lecture. The first battle that we need to talk about that you need to know for your exam is the Battle of Fort Sumter, which happened in 1861 in Charleston, South Carolina. And it's the first battle of the Civil War. A Union fort was forced to surrender after 34 hours under Confederate fire. No lives were lost. Basically what happened was this Union fort needed supplies. Lincoln told South Carolina, I'm going to come, I'm going to give my men food and supplies that they need. We are not trying to invade on you or anything of the sort, because he was hoping that he could work out this issue of secession peacefully. South Carolina told him not to send forces. They surrounded the fort. They bombed the fort for 34 hours. The Union general had no choice but to surrender at that point because he didn't have any supplies. At that point, South Carolina takes over the fort. It belongs to the Confederacy, they declare. And Lincoln realizes, okay, we're not probably going to be able to do this peacefully. And so he realizes we're going to have to go to war over this. And he goes back to the Union and issues a statement asking for men to join for, at the time, what he said was going to be a 90-day commitment. It ends up being much, much longer as the war lasts from 1861 to 1865. But at the time, no one expected it to go this long. The second battle you need to know is the Battle of Antietam, 1862. This happened in Sharpsburg, Maryland. And the main thing you need to remember, it was the bloodiest single day in all of American history. 25,000 men were dead or wounded after one day of fighting. And Lee lost 1/3 of his army. So this battle was only one day. And there were no clear winners at the end of the battle because, as you see, 25,000 men were wounded. But Lee did take a significant hit to his army that day. He lost 1/3 of his men, and he withdrew. Lincoln was hoping that his general at the time would pursue Lee because he was so downtrodden after this loss, but his general did not pursue him. This did anger Lincoln greatly. So the Battle of Antietam, the key thing to remember is that this is an early battle, and 25,000 men are already injured or dead after this one battle. So as you can see, the war is going to be a very bloody war. Okay, the third battle is going to be the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. As you can see, we have moved on from 1861 to 1863. Of course, there were many battles in between. Up until this point, in 1863, the Confederacy had multiple victories all throughout the South and even up towards the northern area. And so the Union morale was very low, and Southern morale, their confidence was very high, and so they felt like we need to push in. The Confederates said we need to push into the North, and we need a clear victory in the North so that once and for all we can end this war and the Union will leave us alone. But unfortunately, that's not what's going to happen at the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg was fought from July 1 to July 3rd, 1863 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. If you get a chance to go to Gettysburg, the battlefield is right in the town. People's homes were on the battlefield. The Confederate forces and the Union forces both meet up in Gettysburg. The Confederate forces were looking for shoes and supplies, and they happened upon each other. It was going to be 90,000 Union forces versus 75,000 Confederate forces. So you can imagine the size of this battle. The battlefield is very large and many miles, and I can't even begin to talk to you about everything that happened in the Battle of Gettysburg on this lecture. But the one that we're going to briefly talk about is Pickett's Charge. and this is going to be done on July 3rd. Basically, Robert E. Lee sent Pickett and his men. He's told them to charge a ridge and up a hill where the Union forces were sitting, and he wanted them to overtake this ridge, and felt like if we did that, it would push, or if the Confederates did that, it would push the Union forces out. And so Pickett and his men charge up the ridge, and they're just bombarded by Union fire and bayonets, and they are just destroyed that day. The Union victory at Pickett's charge just really crushes the Confederate spirit, and they lose so many men that day. And Lee is forced to withdraw. Again, Lincoln wants his general to charge after Lee, to go after him, to follow him and destroy him, because Lee is withdrawing to Virginia, where the capital of the Confederate States of America is. But again, Lincoln's generals refuse to follow Lee. And Lincoln at that point has had enough with all of his generals who he just felt like were not skilled enough. And that's when he's going to bring in Ulysses S. Grant to kind of help finish the job. This is going to be the turning point in the East. At this point, on the Eastern Front, remember they're fighting two fronts because of the Anaconda Plan. We've got a war going on in the West and a war going on in the East. And so this is the turning point in the East. Lee realizes where Lee's men are outnumbered, destroyed, their morale is down, and this is really going to be the beginning of the end for the Confederate Army in the East. Over 51,000 men were dead or wounded after this battle, and Lee is going to retreat to Virginia. This is also in the Gettysburg Address. Is going to be given by Lincoln. He drives in on a train. He comes in on a train to dedicate the cemetery to all the fallen lives. And this is when the speech, 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. I think you had to memorize that like in 5th grade, so I know you know what I'm talking about. But basically, this speech, though very short, is one of the best known speeches in the world, and probably one of Lincoln's best speeches, and we'll talk about more about the Gettysburg Address in class. Okay, the fourth battle that you need to know is the Siege of Vicksburg. It also happened in 1863. It started in May, and it's going to end in July, on July 4th, 1863, one day after Pickett's charge in the East and the Battle of Gettysburg being over. The Siege of Vicksburg is going to be over. Now, the reason it's called a siege and not a battle is Grant and his men had come into Vicksburg, and instead of attacking the Confederate forces that were already stationed in Vicksburg, they decided we're going to surround the town of Vicksburg, and we're just going to wait it out. We're going to keep any supplies from coming in. We're going to keep any troops from going out. We're going to keep the townspeople in, and basically nothing could get in and out. And from May to July, the Union forces surrounded Vicksburg and kept anything from going in and out. And the citizens and the soldiers at Vicksburg ran out of supplies, ran out of food. They started eating dogs and rats because they had nothing left to eat. And on July 4th, Grant and his men are able to capture Vicksburg. When they capture Vicksburg, they capture the Mississippi River. It was the last key spot on the Mississippi River. Because Grant waited this out, the Confederate forces were forced to surrender on July 4th. They just had no supplies left, no men. Or they had men, but no supplies, no ammunition, no food. And the people of Vicksburg needed food as well. And so when Vicksburg falls, the Union forces gain control of the whole Mississippi River. Remember, that's the second part of the Anaconda Plan. And with gaining control of the Mississippi River, they split off Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas from the rest of the Union, and they're not going to be able to get supplies and men back and forth between each other. And this is going to become the turning point in the West. So one day after the turning point in the east with the Battle of Gettysburg, we've got the turning point in the west with the Siege of Vicksburg. And with Grant's victory, Lincoln realizes he's got a real good general with Grant. So he asks Grant to come out to the east, and he becomes the commander of the Union Army. Lincoln knows that Grant's going to be the one to get the job done. So Grant goes on his way to the east, and he takes control of the Eastern Union Army. He sends General Sherman to finish out the southern part of the United States while Grant's going to go towards Virginia. He wants Sherman to go down through Georgia. And so it's going to be number 5, Sherman's March to the Sea. He starts in Tennessee and he goes all the way down through Atlanta, and his goal is to end in Savannah, Georgia, which is right on the Atlantic Ocean. And this is going to be from March to December 1864. Sherman's going to practice what we call total war. Total war means that we're going to destroy everything in our path. Maybe you can see this picture right here. The house is on fire. The railroad's being torn up. Sherman said, we're not going to leave anything for the enemy. We're going to destroy livestock. We'll take what we need and we'll destroy everything else. We'll destroy the fields. We'll burn the houses, the fields. We'll pull up the railroads. We will destroy it. And they left this huge path as they marched through Georgia of total destruction. Bridges burned. Everything was burned. And his theory behind that is if we destroy it, our enemies can't follow us quickly and they can't use anything that we've left behind. And he was very victorious with this total war. The only problem with that is that when the war is over and the Union wins, the Confederacy, the southern states, are going to be totally destroyed. And the Union is going to have to help rebuild that. And it's going to take many years to rebuild the South because of this total destruction. Okay, number 6 is going to be the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. This is going to be in April 1865. Lee surrenders to Grant, and the Union wins. Lee knows that he's not going to win. He wants to keep fighting. He doesn't want to surrender, but he knows that there's no hope. He's running out of men. He's running out of ammunition. His men that he still has have very low morale, and he feels like in order to save the men he has left, he needs to surrender. So he calls Grant, and they meet up at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, and there they sign a treaty to end the war. And Grant is very generous in his terms. He tells the Confederate forces to go home. He sends them home with supplies and whatever they have left and horses. And he just says, it's over, go home. We're not going to punish you. We just need to all go home and start rebuilding. And that's going to be the end of the Civil War. But then we've got years of what we call Reconstruction, which we'll talk about in another video.